Welcome back and welcome to Module 8, the tension of opposites and the transcendent function. This is our final module together, and this is perhaps my favorite topic. At the heart of psychological life lies a fundamental dynamic, the tension between opposing forces within the psyche. These polarities create the energy that drives psychological development. The conflicts that challenge our growth, and ultimately the potential for transformation that Jung saw as the core of the individuation process. Throughout our exploration of Jung's psychology, we've encountered many expressions of this opposition: conscious and unconscious, persona and shadow, thinking and feeling, individual and collective. Today, we'll focus directly on what Jung called the tension of opposites, the dynamic interplay of contrary forces that both challenges and energizes psychological life. Understanding this tension offers profound insights into our inner conflicts, relationship dynamics, creative blocks, and paths toward greater wholeness. Rather than seeing opposition as a problem to be eliminated, Jung recognized it as the very engine of psychological growth, when approached with consciousness and courage. Jung viewed the psyche as fundamentally structured around polarities, complementary opposites that create the full spectrum of psychological experience. Unlike some Eastern philosophies that emphasize the illusory nature of duality, Jung saw these opposites as real psychological forces whose tension creates the possibility for growth. Common pairs of opposites in psychological life include conscious and unconscious awareness, rational and irrational functions, masculine and feminine principles, individual and collective identity, freedom and responsibility, extroversion and introversion, thinking and feeling, order and chaos. The primary polarity in Jung's model is between conscious and unconscious. The awareness we call I versus a vast territory of the psyche that operates autonomously beyond our conscious control. This fundamental opposite creates the basic tension from which all psychological development emerges. What makes these polarities dynamic rather than static is their compensatory relationship. When consciousness becomes one-sided by emphasizing one pole of an opposition, the unconscious naturally compensates by developing the opposite quality. This creates a psychological pressure that seeks balance, not through eliminating the opposition, but through creating a more complete relationship between the opposing elements. One-sidedness develops naturally in the course of psychological growth. As children, we learn which qualities are valued in our family and culture, developing a persona and ego identity that emphasizes certain aspects of experience while relegating others to the unconscious. This selective development is necessary and appropriate for establishing a functional identity. Cultural factors powerfully influence which opposites become conscious or unconscious. Western culture traditionally emphasized rational thinking over intuition, masculine principles over feminine, individual achievement over collective harmony. Family systems similarly valorize certain qualities, perhaps emotional expression in one family, intellectual achievement in another, conformity in a third. The problem isn't one-sidedness itself, which is inevitably necessary for development, but unconscious one-sidedness. The belief that our perspective represents the whole truth, rather than one pole of a larger dynamic. This unconsciousness creates rigid psychological positions that eventually become unstable as compensatory forces build in the unconscious. Signs of compensatory dynamics include emotional reactions disproportionate to situations, dreams that present opposite attitudes to conscious positions, being intensely triggered by qualities in others that oppose your conscious values, fatigue or depletion from maintaining a one-sided position, eruptions of behavior that contradict conscious intentions. These compensatory patterns don't indicate failure, but signal the psyche's natural movement towards wholeness. The tension that they create, while often uncomfortable, holds the seeds of future development. Why does psychological growth require opposition? Jung recognized that tension itself generates the energy necessary for development. Just as physical muscles develop through the resistance of opposing forces, psychological growth requires the energy created when opposing perspectives encounter each other. Without this tension, consciousness tends towards entropy, settling into comfortable but limited patterns that gradually lose vitality. The uncomfortable friction of opposing views, values, or feelings creates the conditions for new insights and perspectives that transcend previous limitations. The danger lies in resolving this tension prematurely through simplistic solutions. When we adopt an either-or approach, choosing one side of an opposition and rejecting the other, we temporarily reduce discomfort but forfeit the potential transformation that the full tension might generate. This creative function of tension appears throughout culture and mythological expressions. The alchemical process centered on the confrontation and eventual integration of opposites. Creation myths worldwide often begin with the differentiation of primordial unity into opposing forces, like light and dark, heaven and earth, masculine and feminine, whose interaction generates all subsequent creation. Most creative breakthroughs emerge not from single perspective thinking, but from the friction between opposing ideas, approaches, or visions. Einstein's revolutionary insights came from holding the tension between apparently contradictory physical phenomena. Artists create through the dialogue between structure and spontaneity, tradition and innovation, conscious craft and unconscious inspiration. How does the tension of opposites manifest in everyday life? These dynamics appear across virtually all dimensions of human experience, often in ways we fail to recognize as expressions of this fundamental psychological principle. Midlife transitions frequently center on the emergence of neglected opposites. The successful executive suddenly questions achievement-oriented values, feeling drawn toward creativity, relationships, or spiritual exploration. The devoted parent finds themselves yearning for individual expression or adventure once children mature. These aren't random crises, but the natural emergence of qualities relegated to the unconscious during earlier developmental phases. Relationship conflicts often represent projections of our inner oppositions. We're drawn to partners who embody qualities opposite to our conscious identity. The structured, responsible person attracted to someone spontaneous and free-spirited. The rational thinker fascinated by an emotional, intuitive type. These attractions reflect the psyche's movement towards wholeness, but without consciousness. They often develop into power struggles, where each partner tries to convert the other to their own position. Professional dilemmas and creative blocks frequently stem from unacknowledged oppositions, perhaps between security and risk, conventional success and authentic expression, or responsibility to others versus fidelity to personal vision. The energy locked in these tensions, when consciously engaged, can transform into creative breakthroughs. Even physical and psychological symptoms sometimes express opposing forces seeking recognition. The anxiety that prevents effective action might represent the tension between conscious ambition and unconscious doubt about one's path. The body that refuses to cooperate with conscious demands might be expressing neglected needs for rest, pleasure, or authenticity. Moving beyond either-or thinking represents one of the most significant challenges and achievements in psychological development. Our educational systems, cultural narratives, and often our family environments train us to resolve ambiguity by choosing sides, developing clear positions that eliminate the discomfort of contradiction or paradox. This binary approach may serve practical functions, but profoundly limit psychological growth. It forces the elimination of valid perspectives, creates unnecessary conflict where complementary truths could coexist, and prevents access to the creative potential that emerges when opposites remain in relationship rather than competing for dominance. Jung distinguished between compromise and transcendence in addressing opposites. Compromise merely splits the difference between opposing positions, reducing both to create temporary harmony but sacrificing the vital energy of their full expression. Transcendence, by contrast, emerges from fully honoring both opposites, maintaining their tension until a new position emerges that integrates their essential truths in a higher order synthesis. This capacity for both and consciousness, holding seemingly contradictory perspectives without prematurely resolving their tension, reflects psychological maturity. It appears in the wisdom traditions of various cultures, from the Taoist embrace of yin and yang, to the Zen appreciation of paradox, to the dialectical thinking in Western philosophy. Importantly, this isn't mere tolerance of contradiction, but active engagement with it, maintaining conscious relationship with opposing perspectives even when they create discomfort or uncertainty. This unwillingness to endure ambiguity creates the conditions where true psychological development becomes possible. The creative potential within psychological opposition provides the ultimate justification for enduring its discomfort. When we maintain conscious relationship with opposing forces, rather than identifying exclusively with one side, we access energy and possibility unavailable to one-sided consciousness. Jung observed this creative function throughout nature and human psychology. The tension between thesis and antithesis creates the possibility for synthesis. The confrontation between conscious position and unconscious compensation generates movement toward more inclusive awareness. The painful opposition between what we have been and what we might become fuels the transformative journey of individuation. This understanding transforms our relationship to psychological suffering. The discomfort of inner conflict, the confusion of competing values, or the pain of outgrown identities represent not dysfunction, but the very conditions necessary for growth. The psyche's movement towards wholeness often feels like being torn apart before the new integration can emerge. Recognizing the creative potential in opposition doesn't eliminate its difficulty, but reframes it as meaningful, part of a larger process of psychological development rather than merely pointless suffering. The ability to maintain relationship with opposing forces, neither collapsing their tension through premature resolution, nor being torn apart by their conflict, creates the psychological space where genuine transformation becomes possible. The tension of opposites represents not a temporary problem on the path of psychological development, but a fundamental life dynamic that continues throughout the individuation journey. At each new level of growth, fresh oppositions emerge, creating both the challenge and the energy for further development. In our next video, we'll explore what Jung called the transcendent function, the psychological process through which the tension of opposites give birth to new consciousness. We'll examine how this function operates, how we can consciously participate in its unfolding, and how various approaches like active imagination, creative expression, dream work, and others can support this transformative process. For now, I invite you to reflect on the oppositions active in your own life. What tension between contrary values, perspectives, or impulses create both energy and difficulty for you? Where might you be unconsciously identified with one side of an important polarity? And how might this discomfort you experience in certain situations reflect the creative tension of opposites seeking a new relationship? Remember that the goal isn't to eliminate these tensions, but to engage with them consciously, not identifying exclusively with either side, but maintaining relationship with both, trusting in the creative potential that emerges when opposites meet in conscious awareness. Okay, bye for now. See you in the next video.